After finishing her shift at a community shelter, this poor college student hurried to the bus stop, exhausted as she waited for the last bus home. Her back ached, her stomach was empty, and the money in her pocket was only enough for one meal the next day. But when she saw an elderly man who looked lost and confused, unsure how to get home, she still used her last bit of money to help him onto the bus and stayed with him to make sure he got home safely. What she didn't know was that the old man was actually a billionaire, and this small act of kindness would change her life forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. The wind cut through Claire Robinson's thin jacket like a knife. 10:15 at night, and the bus stop on Martin Luther King Drive was practically empty. Just the way she liked it after 8 hours at the shelter helping people who had nowhere else to go. She checked her phone. The 63 bus was running 12 minutes late. Of course it was. Claire shifted her weight, feeling the familiar ache in her lower back. 21 years old, and already her body was starting to protest the double shifts. But what choice did she have? Grandma Elise's medications weren't going to pay for themselves, and her social work degree wasn't going to earn itself either. That's when she noticed him. An old white man, maybe mid-70s, standing about 10 feet away. He wore an expensive coat, the kind Claire had only ever seen in department store windows, but something was off. He kept looking at the route map like it was written in a foreign language. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, stared at it, then put it back in his pocket. He didn't belong here. That much was obvious. Claire glanced around. A group of young men had gathered near the corner, passing a bottle in a paper bag, their voices getting louder with each sip. One of them stumbled into the street, laughing. Another started shouting something about respect. The old man's shoulders tensed. He took a step backward, closer to the shadows. Claire watched him for another 30 seconds, watched him look at his phone again, then at the route map, then back at the group of men. His jaw was tight. His breathing had gotten faster. She could mind her own business. That would be the smart thing. She had $7 left until Friday, and that was supposed to cover food for the next 3 days. She was exhausted. Her grandmother needed her home, but she thought about her mother. About the way Denise Robinson had always stopped to help, even when she was running on empty. Even during those last years at the hospital, mopping floors until 2 in the morning, she'd still find time to check on patients who seemed lonely. Claire walked over to him. "Excuse me, sir. You need help finding your bus." The man looked up. Blue-gray eyes, sharp despite his age. He studied her face for a moment, and Claire suddenly felt self-conscious about the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hair was escaping from its braid. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was clipped, practiced. The voice of someone who was used to having problems solved for him, not asking for help. "Okay," Claire nodded and started to turn away. But she didn't leave. Instead, she watched him pull out his phone again, frown at the screen, and shove it back in his pocket with a frustrated exhale. "You sure?" she asked. "Because the routes around here can be confusing, especially this late. Where are you trying to go?" The man hesitated. Claire could see the war happening behind his eyes. Pride versus necessity. Finally, necessity won. "Lincoln Park," he said quietly. "Somewhere near Armitage and Halsted." Claire nodded. "That's the 11. But it doesn't stop here. You'll need to transfer downtown or catch it from State Street." The man's face fell. He looked at the group of young men who were now getting louder, one of them gesturing wildly at another. Then he looked back at Claire. "I don't have any cash," he admitted. And this he held up his phone like it was a foreign object. "My assistant usually handles the transportation apps." "Your assistant?" "Right." Claire reached into her pocket and pulled out her transit card. $7 on it. "Enough for 3 rides or most of tomorrow's lunch." "Here," she said. "I'll tap you on. The 63 will take us to the Red Line, then you can transfer to the 11. "I couldn't possibly. Sir, it's 10:30 at night, and this isn't the safest neighborhood. Please just let me help you get home." Something shifted in his expression. The practiced composure cracked, just for a second, and Claire saw genuine surprise underneath. Like he hadn't expected kindness from a stranger. Maybe he hadn't in a long time. "Thank you," he said finally. "That's very generous." The 63 pulled up 3 minutes later, groaning to a stop with a hiss of hydraulic brakes. Claire tapped her card twice, once for her, once for him, and watched her balance drop to $3.50. That was her lunch money. Gone. Her stomach was already growling, but she pushed the thought away and followed the old man onto the bus. Edward Whitman sat on the cracked plastic seat and felt something he hadn't felt in decades: shame. Not the kind you performed in board meetings when discussing layoffs. Not the calculated regret you expressed when your company's expansion displaced an entire neighborhood. Real shame, the kind that made his throat tight and his eyes burn. This morning had started badly. Actually, this whole week had been a disaster. The Garfield Park situation. That's what his PR team was calling it. As if those were just words and not 300 families who were about to lose their homes. He hadn't wanted to approve the acquisition. Not at first, but the board had been relentless. Richard Chen, his CFO, had sat across from him at the conference table with spreadsheets that showed projections so profitable they seemed almost obscene. Edward, the numbers don't lie. That land is worth 3 times what we're offering. In 5 years it'll be worth 10 times. We'd be fools to walk away. Those are people's homes, Richard. Those are blighted properties in a declining neighborhood. We're doing them a favor. Richard had leaned forward, his voice dropping to that conspiratorial tone he used when he was about to say something he didn't want recorded. Look, I get it. You've got a reputation to maintain. The philanthropist billionaire, the community-minded developer, that's good branding. But at some point, you have to ask yourself, are you running a charity or a company? Edward had hesitated, and in that hesitation, Richard had seen his opening. Your shareholders are getting nervous, Edward. Profits were down 8% last quarter. The board is starting to ask questions. If you walk away from Garfield Park, they're going to see it as weakness. And weakness invites challenges. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You built this company from nothing. You turned your father's little trucking operation into a $3 billion empire. Don't throw that away because you're feeling sentimental about a bunch of row houses that should have been condemned a decade ago. So Edward had signed the papers. That was 4 months ago. And today the residents had shown up at the corporate headquarters in a wave of signs and chanting and raw, justified anger. They'd blocked his car, surrounded it, started rocking it back and forth while security scrambled to respond. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was seeing the faces. The elderly woman with a sign that said 60 years in my home. The young mother with a baby on her hip, tears streaming down her face. The teenager in a basketball jersey, screaming something about his grandmother's garden. Real people, not statistics. Not blighted properties. People whose lives he was destroying for an 8% bump in quarterly profits. Edward had slipped out through a service entrance, his driver stuck in the chaos, his phone dead because he'd forgotten to charge it. He'd walked 6 blocks before realizing he had no idea where he was. And then he'd ended up here, at a bus stop in a neighborhood he'd never set foot in, watching a young black woman pay for his fare with money she clearly couldn't afford to spend. The bus lurched forward. Edward gripped the handrail and watched the city scroll past the dirty window. When was the last time someone had helped him without expecting something in return? The young woman, he should have asked her name, sat down beside him. She pulled out a textbook from her backpack. Something about community mental health services. She highlighted passages with a marker that was nearly dry, making faint yellow streaks across the page. His father would have liked her. The thought came unbidden, a memory Edward hadn't accessed in years. Thomas Whitman, driving his rig across country, gone for weeks at a time. But every time he came home, he had stories, not about the miles or the deliveries, but about the people he'd helped along the way. Picked up a hitchhiker outside of Tulsa. Kid was trying to get to his mama's funeral. Drove 3 hours out of my way to get him there. Found a woman with a flat tire in the middle of nowhere. Changed it for her in the rain. She tried to give me $20. I told her to buy her kid something nice instead. Met a man at a truck stop who hadn't eaten in 2 days. Bought him breakfast. Turned out he was a veteran. Served in Korea. Good man, just down on his luck. Young Edward had asked him once, "Dad, why do you always help people? They're strangers. They're not our problem." Thomas had looked at him with those tired eyes, the ones that had seen too many miles and not enough home. "Everyone's somebody's problem, Eddie. The question is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the reason things stay broken. Thomas Whitman had died of a heart attack in his cab, somewhere on I-80 between Chicago and Des Moines. He was 58, he had $3,200 in his checking account, and a small life insurance policy that barely covered the funeral. Edward had been 29 then, already climbing the corporate ladder, already forgetting where he came from. He'd taken his father's small trucking company and transformed it, first into a regional logistics operation, then into a national supply chain for medical equipment, then into a real estate empire that developed the warehouses and distribution centers that made the whole thing possible. Now he was 74 years old, worth more than $3 billion, and he was riding a city bus because a college student had taken pity on him. What would his father think of the man he'd become? The bus stopped and more passengers climbed on. The young woman shifted to make room, pressing herself against the window so a tired-looking mother with 2 small children could squeeze past. She made herself smaller, for strangers, automatically, without even thinking about it. Edward couldn't remember the last time he'd made himself smaller for anyone. The train jerked to a stop, and Edward realized they'd reached the transfer point. The young woman stood up, gathering her things. "This is where we switch to the red line," she said. "I'll walk you to the platform." "That's not necessary. It's a big station. Easy to get lost if you don't know it." Edward followed her off the bus and through the underground tunnels of the Chicago transit system. She walked quickly, efficiently, like someone who'd made this journey 1,000 times. He struggled to keep up, his 74-year-old legs protesting the pace. "You're a student?" he asked, partly to make conversation and partly because he was genuinely curious. "Social work. At Northeastern Illinois. That's a difficult field. It's a necessary one." They reached the Red Line platform. A train was just pulling in, its lights cutting through the dim station. "This is you," she said. "Take it north to Fullerton, then transfer to the 11. It'll drop you right at Armitage and Halstead." "Thank you. Truly, I don't know what I would have done without your help." The young woman shrugged, but there was something in her eyes, a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Just try to get home safe, okay?" She turned to leave. "Wait," Edward said. "What's your name?" "Claire. Claire Robinson." "Thank you, Claire. I won't forget this." The train doors opened. Edward stepped inside and turned back, but Claire was already walking away, disappearing into the crowd of late-night commuters. He watched her go and felt the weight of 74 years pressing down on him. She'd given him her bus fare, walked him through a complicated transit system, made herself late getting home, and she'd done it all without asking for anything in return. When was the last time he'd done something like that for anyone? The train doors closed. Edward sank into a seat and stared at his reflection in the dark window. Tomorrow he would go back to his office, back to the quarterly reports and the board meetings and the Garfield Park situation, back to being the kind of person who displaced 300 families for an 8% bump in profits. But tonight he sat alone with his shame and wondered if it was too late to become someone else. Claire missed her stop. She'd meant to get off at the transfer point, switch to the southbound line, and head home to Grandma Elise, but somewhere between helping the old man find the red line and watching him disappear into the train, she'd made a decision. She stayed on the platform, watched his train until it vanished into the tunnel. Then she walked back up to the street and started the long walk home. Her bus wasn't coming for another 40 minutes anyway, and she'd just spent her last fare on a stranger. 4 miles wasn't that far. She'd done it before. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees since she'd left the shelter. Her jacket was too thin, her gloves had holes in the fingers, and her sneakers were held together with duct tape and prayer. But she walked fast, pumping her arms to generate heat, counting the blocks to keep her mind off the cold. 1 block, 2 blocks, 3. Her phone buzzed. A text from Grandma Elise. "You coming home soon, baby? Made you a plate." Claire smiled despite the cold. Grandma always made her a plate, even though they both knew there wasn't enough food for 2 full meals. Elise Robinson was 78 years old, diabetic, and had barely survived a stroke 2 years ago. She still insisted on cooking dinner every night, even when her hands shook so badly she could barely hold a spoon. Claire typed back, "On my way." Traffic. She didn't mention the 4-mile walk, didn't mention that she'd given away her bus fare. Grandma would just worry, and worrying was bad for her blood pressure. 10 blocks. 11. 12. Claire's feet were numb inside her worn sneakers. Her fingers had stopped feeling the cold, which probably wasn't a good sign. But she kept walking, kept counting, kept thinking about the old man on the bus. He'd been lost. Genuinely, completely lost. A grown man who didn't know how to use a transit app, who didn't have cash for a bus fare, who couldn't figure out how to get home without someone holding his hand. What kind of life did you have to live to end up that helpless? The rich kind, she thought. The kind where someone else handles everything. She imagined what that must be like. Having an assistant who managed your transportation. A driver who appeared whenever you needed to go somewhere. A world where problems were solved before you even knew they existed. It sounded nice. It also sounded terrifying. Like being a child who never grew up. 20 blocks. 21. 22. Claire's phone buzzed again. This time it was her supervisor at the shelter. Got a situation. Woman came in with 3 kids, no documentation. Can you come back in? Claire stopped walking, looked at the message, looked at the blocks stretching ahead of her. She was exhausted, frozen, starving. She had a paper due tomorrow that she hadn't started. Grandma was waiting for her with a plate that probably wouldn't get eaten. She typed back, "On my way." Then she turned around and started walking in the opposite direction. Because that's what you did when you were Claire Robinson. When someone needed help, you helped. Even when it cost you something. Even when it cost you everything. That's what her mother had taught her. That's what her mother had died doing. It was nearly 3 in the morning by the time Claire finally made it home. The woman at the shelter had been fleeing an abusive husband, 3 kids under 6, no money, no ID, nowhere to go. Claire had spent 2 hours on the phone with emergency services, social workers, and anyone else who might be able to help. She'd found them a placement at a domestic violence shelter across town, had stayed until the transport arrived, until she was sure the woman and her children were safe. Now she climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, her legs shaking with exhaustion. The elevator had been broken for 2 months. Management kept promising to fix it. Management promised a lot of things. Grandma Elise was asleep in her chair, the TV playing softly in the background. A plate of food sat on the kitchen counter, covered in plastic wrap, rice and beans and a small piece of chicken. Grandma's specialty. Claire didn't eat it. She couldn't. The thought of food made her stomach turn. Instead she covered Grandma with a blanket, turned off the TV, and went to her room. She had 4 hours until her alarm went off. 4 hours to sleep, then she had to be at campus for her 8 o'clock class. She lay down on her bed without changing clothes. Too tired to move, too tired to think. But sleep wouldn't come. She kept seeing the old man's face, the confusion, the fear, the way he'd looked at her when she offered to help, like he couldn't quite believe someone would do that. And she kept thinking about her mother. Denise Robinson had worked at Northwestern Hospital for 23 years, not as a doctor, not as a nurse, as a janitor. She'd mopped floors and emptied bedpans and scrubbed toilets that patients and doctors used without ever noticing who kept them clean. She'd been good at her job, too good. She'd taken on extra shifts, covered for coworkers who were sick, stayed late to help with emergencies. The hospital had given her a plaque once, Employee of the Month. It was still hanging in Grandma's living room. 2 years ago, Denise had collapsed in the hospital cafeteria. Massive stroke. She'd been cleaning tables after a late-night code, running on 4 hours of sleep and too much coffee. By the time anyone found her, it was too late. Claire had been 19 years old, halfway through her sophomore year. She'd had to drop out for a semester to handle the funeral, the bills, the 1,000 small details that came with losing the only parent she'd ever known. Her father had never been in the picture. Just a name on a birth certificate, and a child support check that had stopped coming when Claire was 12. Now it was just her and Grandma Elise, 2 women trying to survive in a city that didn't seem to care if they lived or died. Claire's phone buzzed. She thought it was another emergency at the shelter, but it was just a reminder from the library. Your hold on community mental health theory and practice is ready for pickup. Great. A textbook she couldn't afford to buy, but could borrow for 2 weeks at a time. The story of her life. She finally drifted off around 4, dreaming of her mother mopping floors that never got clean. The next few weeks passed in a blur of exhaustion. classes, work, grandma's doctor appointments, the endless paperwork of being poor, Medicaid forms, financial aid applications, utility bills that had to be juggled and negotiated, and sometimes simply ignored until the final notice came. Claire didn't think about the old man on the bus. She didn't have time to think about anything except surviving until Friday, when her paycheck hit, and she could breathe for approximately 6 hours before the bills started eating it alive. 3 weeks after that night at the bus stop, Claire was at the campus library, trying to finish a paper on trauma-informed care. Her laptop was ancient, held together with tape and hope. The battery had died 2 hours ago, so she was tethered to the outlet, competing for space with a dozen other students who were equally desperate. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Is this Claire Robinson? This is the West Side Community Health Clinic. Your grandmother's prescription is ready for pickup." Claire frowned. She didn't remember requesting a refill. Grandma's diabetes medication wasn't due for another week. She called the clinic during her break. "Yes, Miss Robinson, we have the prescription ready. It's been fully paid for. You can pick it up any time before 6. The payment came through a private donor fund the clinic used for emergency cases." "Paid for, by who?" "I'm sorry, I don't have that information, just that the balance is 0. Claire hung up, confused. Maybe Medicaid had finally processed the appeal she'd filed 3 months ago. Maybe there'd been some kind of billing error in her favor. Either way, she wasn't going to question a 0 balance. She picked up the prescription after class. The pharmacist handed her a bag that seemed heavier than usual. "There's a 3-month supply in there," the pharmacist said, "plus the other medications on her file, all covered. All of them. Blood pressure, cholesterol, the diabetic supplies, everything." Claire stood there staring at the bag. This had to be a mistake. Grandma's medications cost over $400 a month, even with insurance. 3 months would be well over $1,000. "Are you sure there isn't some kind of error?" "No error, ma'am. It's all been taken care of." Claire walked out of the clinic in a daze. 3 months of medication, paid for by someone. But who? She thought about calling the clinic back, demanding answers. But honestly, she was too tired to look a gift horse in the mouth. Whatever this was, whoever had done it, she'd take it. The letter arrived 2 weeks later. Claire almost didn't open it. Official mail from the school usually meant bad news: tuition increases, schedule changes, reminders about deadlines she was already painfully aware of. But something made her pause. The envelope was heavier than usual. The return address was the dean's office. She tore it open and read, "Dear Miss Robinson, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of the Thomas Whitman Community Leadership Scholarship for the current academic year. This scholarship provides full coverage of tuition and fees, textbook and supply allowance of $1,000 per semester, monthly living stipend of $1,200, renewable for up to 3 years, contingent on maintaining a GPA above 3.5. The Thomas Whitman Community Leadership Scholarship was established to support students pursuing careers in social work and community development who demonstrate exceptional dedication to serving underserved populations. Please contact the financial aid office at your earliest convenience to complete the necessary paperwork." Claire read the letter 4 times. Then she sat down on the steps outside her apartment building and cried. Not quiet tears. Great heaving sobs that made her whole body shake. $1,200 a month. Full tuition, books. She could cut back her hours at the shelter. She could actually sleep more than 4 hours a night. She could buy grandma's medications without counting every dollar. She could eat real meals instead of skipping lunch. She could breathe. After 15 minutes, Claire wiped her eyes and pulled out her phone. She searched for Thomas Whitman Community Leadership Scholarship. Nothing came up. No website, no news articles, just a brief mention on the university's scholarship database listing it as newly established. She searched for Thomas Whitman Chicago, and there it was. An obituary from 1978. Thomas Whitman, long-haul truck driver, survived by his wife Patricia and son Edward. Edward. Claire's hands started to shake. She searched for Edward Whitman Chicago, CEO of Whitman Development Corporation. Net worth estimated at $3.2 billion, major commercial and residential developer throughout the Midwest. currently overseeing the controversial Garfield Park Revitalization Project. The Garfield Park Revitalization Project. Claire had been following that story for months. The community protests, the displacement of residents, the wealthy developers swooping in to transform a poor neighborhood into luxury condos. She scrolled through the images, and there he was. The old man from the bus stop, standing at a podium wearing a $1,000 suit, smiling for the cameras. Edward Whitman, the billionaire who was destroying communities for profit, had created a scholarship in his father's name and given it to her. Claire felt a complicated tangle of emotions crash over her. Gratitude, yes, but also confusion, anger, the searing shame of being someone's charity project. She hadn't asked for his help. She hadn't wanted to be his way of easing his conscience. And the medications, the prescription that had mysteriously been paid for, that had to be him too. He'd been investigating her, digging into her life, deciding what she needed without ever asking her permission. Claire stood up from the steps, her tears drying into something harder. She needed to find him, needed to understand why he'd done this. And then she needed to decide if she could live with accepting help from a man who was destroying other people's lives while pretending to save hers. Edward was in his office when his assistant buzzed. "Sir, there's a young woman here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says her name is Claire Robinson. She says you'll want to see her." Edward felt his heart skip. "Send her in." The Claire who walked through his door looked nothing like the exhausted girl he'd met at the bus stop. She looked angry. Her jaw was set, her shoulders squared, her eyes burning with a fire he recognized immediately. She'd figured it out. "The scholarship," she said without preamble. "That was you." "Yes." "And the medications? Grandma's prescriptions?" "Yes." "Why?" Edward stood and gestured toward the seating area by the window. "Would you like to sit down?" "No. I want answers." "Fair enough." He remained standing too, meeting her gaze. "I did it because you helped me when you didn't have to. Because you gave me your bus fare when you needed it yourself. Because you showed me kindness when I didn't deserve it. That was $3. This is," Claire's voice cracked. "This is my whole life. You're paying for my education, my grandmother's medical care. You've been investigating me, digging through my life. I had someone find your name, where you went to school. That's all." He had his assistant do a basic background check. Nothing invasive, just enough to make sure she was real. "That's all. You made decisions about my future without ever asking me what I wanted." Edward was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the Chicago skyline glittered in the afternoon sun. Somewhere out there in Garfield Park, 300 families were packing up their lives because of decisions he'd made in this very office. "You're right," he said finally. "I should have asked. I should have talked to you first, but I wasn't sure you'd accept help if it came from me directly." "You mean from a billionaire who's kicking families out of their homes so he can build luxury condos?" Edward flinched. "You know about Garfield Park. Everyone knows about Garfield Park. It's been all over the news. Protesters surrounding your car, families being displaced, the community being destroyed." Claire's voice rose. "You're the villain of that story, Edward. You're the rich guy who swoops in and takes whatever he wants, and then you have the audacity to give me a scholarship like that. Makes it okay. It doesn't make it okay. I know that. Then why do it? Why help me while you're hurting all those other people?" Edward walked to his desk and picked up a folder. "Because of this." He handed it to her. Inside were pages of notes, financial projections, architectural plans. "What is this?" "The new plan for Garfield Park. Mixed-use development with 40% affordable housing, community health clinic, job training center, child care facility. We're keeping as many existing residents as possible and giving them first right of refusal on the new units." The change did not come quietly. 2 board members resigned within a week, citing strategic instability. Analysts downgraded the project, and Whitman Development stock dipped 6% overnight. Edward spent long hours in closed-door meetings defending a plan that no longer promised maximum returns. For the first time in decades he stopped being praised for his instincts and started being questioned for them. Claire stared at the documents. This is completely different from what was announced. I changed it 3 weeks ago, right after I met you." "Why?" Edward sat down heavily in his chair. For a moment he looked every one of his 74 years. Because you reminded me of my father. He drove trucks for 35 years. Cross-country routes, gone for weeks at a time. And every time he came home he had stories about the people he'd helped along the way. Strangers who needed a ride, motorists who were stranded, anyone who needed it he stopped. He pulled out an old yellowed piece of paper. When he died I found this in his things. A letter he wrote to me. He wanted to be a community health worker. Did you know that's even a job? I didn't until I read this. He wanted to help people in small towns, the kind of places nobody else wanted to go. But he couldn't afford school, so he drove trucks instead. Edward handed her the letter. Read it. Please. Claire took the paper with trembling hands. The handwriting was faded but legible. Eddie, if you're reading this I'm probably gone. That's okay, everyone goes eventually. The question is what you leave behind. I wanted to be a community health worker. Did you know that? I wanted to help people in small towns, the kind of places doctors don't want to go. But your mama got pregnant with you, and there wasn't money for school, so I drove trucks instead. I'm not complaining. I liked the road, I liked the freedom, and I loved coming home to you and your mama. But sometimes I wonder what I could have done if things had been different. This scholarship is my way of finding out. Maybe one of these kids will do what I never got to do. Maybe they'll help people I never got to help. Maybe the ripples will spread farther than I can imagine. That's the thing about kindness, Eddie. You never know where it's going to end up. You just have to trust that it matters. I hope you remember that. Love, Dad. When Claire looked up there were tears on her face. Your father sounds like a good man, she said. He was. And I spent 50 years forgetting everything he tried to teach me. Edward paused. After that night at the bus stop I pulled out his files. The scholarship he established before he died. $5,000 a year for students who wanted to go into healthcare. It's been running for 46 years on autopilot. I never met any of the recipients, never read their thank you letters, just signed the checks. And now I'm trying to do better. The scholarship I gave you is separate from my father's fund. It's specifically for students in social work and community development. People like you who are trying to help others. He met her eyes. I didn't do it because I pitied you. I did it because you reminded me of what my father believed. That kindness matters. That helping people isn't about what you get in return. That the ripples spread farther than we can see. Claire was quiet for a long moment. The anger was still there simmering beneath the surface. But something else was emerging too. Understanding maybe, or at least the beginning of it. I'm going to accept the scholarship, she said finally. Not because of you, not because I'm grateful, but because I've worked too hard to let pride get in the way of my future. That's all I ask. And I'm paying it back. Every cent when I graduate, when I have a job. I'm paying back the full amount so you can give it to someone else. Claire, that's non-negotiable. I need to know this isn't charity. I need to know I earned it. Edward studied her face. He saw the fierce determination there. The refusal to be reduced to someone's project. All right, he said. When you're ready you can pay it back, or you can pay it forward to the next student who needs it. Your choice. Claire nodded. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Claire, she paused. I'm going to the Garfield Park community meeting tomorrow night to present the new development plan. I think the residents deserve to hear it from me directly. He hesitated. Would you come with me? I could use someone who understands what these families are going through. Someone who can tell me if I'm getting it wrong. Claire looked at him for a long moment. I'll think about it, she said. Then she left without looking back. The community meeting was chaos. Edward had expected resistance. He'd expected anger, skepticism, the kind of distrust that came from years of broken promises and empty words. What he hadn't expected was the raw, visceral pain. An elderly woman stood at the microphone, her voice trembling with age and fury. You came here with your fancy plans and your fancy lawyers and you told us we had to leave. You told us our homes weren't worth saving. And now you want us to trust you. Now you want us to believe that this time it'll be different. Edward tried to respond, but another voice cut in. My grandmother built that house with her own hands. Her and my grandfather, brick by brick, 60 years ago. And you're telling me you're going to tear it down and build something better. A young man, maybe 25, his face twisted with anger. What's better than 60 years of family history? What's better than the place where my mother was born? where my children were supposed to grow up. The crowd was getting louder, hostile. Edward could feel the security team tensing, ready to intervene. And then Claire stepped forward. She'd been standing in the back of the room watching, evaluating. Now she walked to the front, her presence somehow calming the crowd. "My name is Claire Robinson," she said. "I'm a student at Northeastern Illinois studying social work. I grew up about 15 blocks from here. I know this neighborhood. I know these streets." The crowd quieted slightly. "I met Mr. Whitman about 6 weeks ago. Not in a boardroom or at a fancy dinner. At a bus stop on MLK Drive, at 10:30 at night. He was lost, confused, didn't know how to get home, so I helped him." She looked at Edward. "At the time I didn't know who he was. I just saw an old man who needed help. And later when I found out what his company was doing here, I was angry. I'm still angry, because what happened to this community, the displacement, the broken promises, that was wrong. It doesn't matter who did it or why, it was wrong." The young man who'd spoken earlier nodded, his expression softening slightly. "But here's the thing," Claire continued, "being angry doesn't fix anything. Being angry doesn't bring back your grandmother's house or give you back 60 years of history. The only thing that fixes anything is working together to build something better." She turned to face the crowd fully. "Mr. Whitman isn't here tonight to sell you anything. He's here to listen, to understand what this community actually needs. Not what some development report says you need, what you actually need. And then to actually try to build something that serves you instead of displacing you." "Why should we trust him?" someone called out. "You shouldn't," Claire said. "Not yet. Trust has to be earned, and he hasn't earned it. But neither should you give up without hearing what he has to say. Because if you walk away now, if you refuse to even listen, then nothing changes. The original plan goes forward, the developers win, and this neighborhood loses." There was a long silence. Then the elderly woman who'd spoken first said, "Let him talk, but he better have something real to say." Edward stepped forward, his heart pounding. "The original development plan was wrong," he said. "It prioritized profits over people. It treated this community as an obstacle to be overcome, rather than a resource to be supported. And I approved it because I was too focused on spreadsheets to see the families behind the numbers." He pulled out the new plans. "Here's what I'm proposing instead. 40% affordable housing, at below market rates, with priority given to current residents. A community health clinic on the ground floor, providing free basic care. A job training center focused on skills that are actually in demand. And a child care facility, because I know how hard it is for working parents to find affordable care." He paused. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to hold me accountable. I'm asking you to form a community oversight committee that has real power, veto power, over major decisions. I'm asking you to help me build something that actually serves this neighborhood instead of destroying it." The crowd murmured, people exchanged glances. "What's the catch?" the young man asked. "No catch, just my word that I'll do better. And if I don't, if I break that promise, I'm giving the community committee the legal authority to sue me personally for breach of contract." That got their attention. "You're serious?" the elderly woman asked. "I'm serious. I've already had my lawyers draw up the paperwork. If the oversight committee determines that I failed to meet the commitments I'm making tonight, they can hold me personally liable for damages." There was a long pause. Then slowly, people started to nod. 3 months later, Claire sat in her apartment, staring at her laptop screen. She'd just finished her last final of the semester. Her GPA was 3.94. She was on track to graduate with honors. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't completely exhausted. The scholarship had changed everything. She'd cut her hours at the shelter from 30 to 15. She'd started sleeping 7 hours a night instead of 4. She'd eaten 3 meals a day, every day, for 3 months straight. And she'd gotten involved with the Garfield Park development. Edward had been true to his word. The Community Oversight Committee had real power. They'd rejected 3 designs before approving one that actually reflected what residents wanted. The health clinic was already under construction. The job training center was scheduled to open in 6 months. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. but it was better. Measurably, demonstrably better. Her phone buzzed. A text from Edward. Can you meet me at the construction site tomorrow? There's something I want to show you. The Garfield Park site was unrecognizable from 6 months ago. Where there had been empty lots and condemned buildings, there was now the skeleton of something new. Steel frames rising toward the sky. Construction crews working in organized chaos. Signs explaining what was being built, and when it would be finished. Edward was waiting for her near the entrance. "Thank you for coming," he said. "What did you want to show me?" He led her through the construction site, past the framework of the affordable housing units, past the space designated for the health clinic, to a small corner lot that Claire hadn't noticed before. There was a sign in front of it. The Dennis Robinson Community Garden, in memory of a woman who gave everything to help others. Claire's breath caught. "How did you told me about your mother, how she worked at the hospital, how she collapsed while she was cleaning tables, how she died alone because she was always putting everyone else first." Edward turned to face her. "I wanted to honor that, honor her. This garden will be maintained by the community, but it's dedicated to her memory. To all the people like her who work behind the scenes, keeping the world running, never asking for recognition or reward." Claire stood there, tears streaming down her face. She would have hated this, she said finally. She never wanted attention, never wanted anyone to make a fuss. Then maybe she would have wanted this instead. Edward handed her a folder. "What's this?" "A scholarship fund, separate from the one you're receiving. This one is specifically for children of service workers, janitors, housekeepers, cafeteria workers, home health aides, people like your mother, who keep the world running, while being completely invisible." Claire opened the folder. Inside was a detailed proposal. 10 scholarships per year, full tuition and living expenses, named the Denise Robinson Service Worker Scholarship. "You're serious," she whispered. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Claire looked at the garden plot, at the sign with her mother's name, at the man who had gone from being a stranger on a bus to someone she was starting to understand. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "All of it. The community development, the oversight committee, the scholarships. Why?" Edward was quiet for a moment. "Because of what you said that night, at the bus stop. You asked me where I was trying to go, and I told you Lincoln Park. But the truth is, I'd been lost for a lot longer than that. Lost since my father died, maybe lost my whole life." He looked at the construction site around them. "I spent 50 years building an empire, towers and warehouses and distribution centers. I told myself I was creating jobs, building communities, making a difference. But the truth is, I was just accumulating money, power, property, things that don't matter when you're lying in a hospital bed at the end of your life, wondering if anyone will remember you. Your children will remember you." "Will they?" Edward's voice was heavy. "My son barely speaks to me. We have dinner twice a year because his wife insists on it. My daughter hasn't talked to me in 11 years. 11 years, she wanted to be a teacher. I told her she was wasting her potential, told her she could run the company someday, have everything I'd built, and she was throwing it away to grade papers and deal with teenagers." He paused. "She walked out of my office that day, and never came back." "What was her name?" "Elizabeth. She teaches high school chemistry somewhere in Ohio. I know because I pay someone to keep track of her, but I haven't heard her voice in over a decade." Claire thought about that. 11 years of silence, 11 years of pride and stubbornness, and whatever else kept families apart. "Have you tried calling her?" 100 times. She doesn't answer. I've written letters, they come back unopened. Edward's voice cracked slightly. "I think I've lost her, Claire. The way I almost lost everything that mattered. But you're trying now. That's something. Is it? Can you really make up for 11 years of being wrong?" Claire thought about her own mother, about all the things they'd never had time to say, all the conversations that had been cut short by exhaustion and work and the constant pressure of survival. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but not trying guarantees you can't. Trying at least gives you a chance." Edward nodded slowly. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I wrote her another letter last night. I was going to mail it this morning, but," He looked at the envelope like it might bite him. I don't know if I have the courage. What did you say? That I was wrong, that I'm sorry, that I finally understand what my father was trying to teach me, and I wish I'd learned it sooner. He paused. And that I'd like to meet her again, if she's willing. Even if it's just for an hour, even if she never forgives me. Claire looked at the envelope, at the careful handwriting on the front, at the stamps that showed this letter had been started, and stopped multiple times before being finished. Mail it, she said. What if she doesn't answer? Then you'll know you tried, and that's more than most people ever do. Edward looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded, put the letter back in his pocket, and turned toward the construction site. Come on, he said. There's more I want to show you. 6 months passed. The community health clinic opened in April. Claire was there for the ribbon cutting, standing next to Edward and the members of the community oversight committee. The elderly woman who'd confronted him at that first meeting was the one who cut the ribbon, tears streaming down her face. Never thought I'd see the day, she said. A clinic right here in our neighborhood, where we don't have to take 3 buses to see a doctor, where they actually speak our language and understand our lives. The job training center opened in June. Within 3 months, it had placed 47 residents in new jobs. Not minimum wage retail, real jobs, with benefits and career paths. The affordable housing units started accepting residents in August. 62 families, many of whom had been displaced by the original development plan, came back to a neighborhood that was finally starting to heal. And Claire graduated with honors, her 3.96 GPA, the highest in her program. Edward was at the ceremony, sitting in the back row. He'd asked her permission to come, and she'd said yes, not because she owed him anything, but because she'd come to understand that he needed to see this, needed to witness the results of what they'd built together. Afterward he found her in the crowd. Congratulations, he said. You earned this. Thank you for everything. You don't need to thank me. You did the work. I just helped a little. Claire smiled. You helped more than a little, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure that help goes to other people who need it. I know you will. Edward hesitated. I have some news. What? Elizabeth called me last week. Claire's eyes widened. She called. She got my letter. The one I mailed after we talked at the construction site. She said it took her 6 months to decide whether to open it, and then another month to decide whether to respond. What did she say? That she's willing to try, that she's not ready to forgive me yet, but she's willing to have a conversation. She invited me to come visit her in Ohio next month. Edward, that's wonderful. I'm terrified, he admitted. I don't know how to be a father anymore. I don't know if I ever knew how. You'll figure it out. Just like you figured out how to be a better developer, how to actually listen to communities instead of bulldozing over them. That was mostly you and the oversight committee. It was you too. You could have walked away at any point, could have gone back to the original plan when things got difficult, but you didn't. Edward nodded slowly, then he pulled something out of his pocket. I want to give you this. It was a key, old tarnished, attached to a worn leather keychain. What is it? The key to my father's truck. The one he was driving when he died. I've kept it all these years, in a drawer in my office. Never knew why, but I think I do now. Claire took the key, feeling the weight of it in her palm. He would have liked you, Edward said. My father. He would have understood what you're trying to do. The way you help people without expecting anything in return. The way you see the humanity in everyone, even old billionaires who've lost their way. Thank you, Claire whispered. No, thank you, for reminding me what matters, for helping me find my way back. He looked at her for a long moment. I'm 75 years old. I probably don't have a lot of time left, but whatever time I do have, I'm going to spend it the way my father would have wanted. Helping people, building things that matter, trying to make up for 50 years of getting it wrong. That sounds like a good plan. Will you help me? Keep me honest. Tell me when I'm slipping back into old habits. Claire smiled. I'll do my best. That's all anyone can ask. They stood there in the crowd of graduates and families, 2 people from completely different worlds, who had found common ground in the simplest of places. A bus stop on a cold Chicago night.
a moment of kindness that had changed everything. 2 years later, Claire stood in the office of the newly expanded Thomas Whitman Community Center. The center had grown far beyond its original scope. What had started as a single health clinic was now a sprawling complex that included a job training center, a child care facility, a mental health services wing, and a community garden that grew fresh vegetables for the food bank next door. And at the center of it all, a bronze plaque with 2 names, Thomas Whitman and Denise Robinson. Claire was no longer a student, she was the director of community services, responsible for overseeing all the programs that the Whitman Foundation funded in this neighborhood. It was the job she'd always wanted, the job her mother would have been proud of. Her phone buzzed, a text from Edward. "Can you come to the hospital, room 412? Claire's heart dropped. She'd known this was coming. Edward had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 6 months ago. He'd fought hard, but the disease was winning. She took a cab to Northwestern Memorial, the same hospital where her mother had worked for 23 years, the same hospital where her mother had died. Room 412 was on the oncology floor. When Claire walked in, she found Edward propped up in bed, looking small and fragile in a way she'd never seen before. But he wasn't alone. A woman sat beside him, holding his hand. She was in her late 40s, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. And there were children, 2 of them, maybe 10 and 12, sitting on the other side of the bed, showing Edward something on a tablet.
Elizabeth, Edward's daughter, and her children. "Claire," Edward said, his voice weak but warm. "Come in. I want you to meet my family." The introductions were brief. Elizabeth was exactly what Claire had imagined, thoughtful, kind, with a teacher's patient way of explaining things. Her children, Marcus and Sophie, had their grandfather's blue-gray eyes. "He talks about you all the time," Elizabeth said, "about how you helped him find his way back. It wasn't just me, he did the work, but you reminded him it was possible. That's what he tells me anyway." Elizabeth smiled. "I spent 11 years being angry at him, and then I got his letter, and I realized that being angry wasn't hurting him, it was hurting me." "Do you forgive him?" Elizabeth looked at her father, who was now laughing at something Marcus had shown him on the tablet. "I'm working on it. Some days are easier than others, but we're talking, we're rebuilding, and that's more than I ever thought we'd have." Edward looked up, caught Claire's eye. "Come here," he said. "I need to tell you something." Claire walked to the bedside. The children moved to give her space. "The foundation," Edward said. "I've restructured it. It's no longer controlled by my family or by any corporation. It's now governed by a board made up entirely of former scholarship recipients and community members. You're giving up control. I'm giving it to the people who understand what it's for. People like you." He paused. "I've also established a successor fund. When I'm gone, the foundation will have enough resources to operate for at least 50 years without any additional funding. Maybe longer if it's managed well. Edward, and I want you on the board. Not alone, together with community members, former recipients, people who understand what this work actually costs. No single person would control the foundation. Major decisions required consensus, and the communities being served held veto power over projects that affected their lives." Power made Claire uneasy. She had seen what it did to people, how easily good intentions could harden into control. Claire felt tears sliding down her face. "I don't know if I'm ready for that. You've been ready since the night you paid for my bus fare. You just didn't know it yet." Edward reached out and took her hand. "Promise me you'll keep the ripples spreading. Promise me you'll help people the way my father would have. The way your mother did." "I promise," Claire whispered. "Good." Edward closed his eyes. "I'm tired now, but I'm glad you're here. I'm glad I got to see you one more time." Edward Whitman died 3 days later. He was surrounded by family, Elizabeth, her husband, the grandchildren he'd finally gotten to know. Claire was there too, holding his hand as he slipped away. His funeral drew hundreds of people, not just executives and politicians but nurses and teachers and social workers and community members who had been touched by the programs he'd funded in his final years. Claire spoke at the service. "Edward Whitman spent 73 years of his life building an empire," she said. "And he spent the last 2 years building something better." She told the story of the bus stop, of the scholarship, of the community center and the affordable housing and all the ripples that had spread from one small moment of kindness. Edward used to say that his father's legacy was built on $5,000 and one simple belief that helping people matters more than accumulating wealth. He spent most of his life proving his father wrong, but in the end he remembered. She looked at Elizabeth in the front row, at the grandchildren who were trying not to cry, at all the strangers who had become family through nothing more than the choice to help. The ripples keep spreading, Claire said, long after we're gone. That's the only immortality any of us ever get. 5 years later, Claire stood in the lobby of the Whitman Robinson Community Center, watching families stream through the doors. The center had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. What had once been a converted warehouse on the south side was now a 3-story facility serving over 12,000 people per year. Health clinic, job training, childcare, mental health services, food pantry, legal aid, immigration assistance, everything a community needed not just to survive but to thrive. And on the wall near the entrance, a row of photographs. Harold Whitman, young and hopeful in his trucker's uniform, standing beside his rig somewhere on a highway in the 1960s. Denise Robinson, in her hospital custodian scrubs, smiling at the camera with tired eyes but genuine warmth. Edward Whitman, in one of his last photographs, standing at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the rooftop greenhouse. Claire touched each photograph as she passed. "Thank you," she whispered. "All of you." Her phone buzzed. A message from Rebecca, Edward's daughter. "The kids want to know if Aunt Claire is coming to Thanksgiving. Emma's making that sweet potato pie you taught her." Claire smiled and typed back, "Tell her to save me a big slice. I'll be there." She had become part of their family now, not by blood, but by something stronger, by the bonds that formed when you chose to help someone, and they chose to help you back, and those choices rippled outward until you couldn't tell where one life ended and another began. The front door of the center opened, and a young man walked in, maybe 19 years old, with exhausted eyes and clothes that had been washed too many times. His shoes were held together with duct tape, his backpack had patches sewn over patches. Claire recognized him immediately. Not the specific person, but the type. She had been that person once, exhausted, struggling, carrying weight that no one else could see. "Can I help you?" she asked. The young man looked at her nervously. "I'm here about the scholarship, the Denise Robinson Service Worker Scholarship. I got a letter saying I'd been selected, but there must be some mistake. I didn't even apply. What's your name?" "Jerome. Jerome Washington." Claire smiled. "There's no mistake, Jerome. The scholarship committee reviews nominations from community organizations. Your supervisor at the nursing home submitted your name 3 months ago, Mrs. Patterson. But why would she? I mean, there must be people who need it more than me. Maybe, but you're the one who stayed late to help Mr. Okonkwo practice his English when his family couldn't visit. You're the one who learned sign language so you could communicate with Mrs. Chen when she felt isolated. You're the one who gave your lunch to a coworker whose food stamps hadn't come through yet." Jerome's eyes widened. "How do you know all that?" "Because that's what this scholarship is for. People who help others even when it costs them something. People who choose kindness when it would be easier to look away." Claire reached out and shook his hand. "I was in your position once. I was exhausted and broke and carrying weight that felt impossible to bear. And someone saw me, someone helped me. Now I'm trying to do the same for you." Jerome's jaw tightened, the way people's jaws tightened when they were trying not to cry. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, you just have to do one thing for me." "What?" "When you're in a position to help someone else, do it. Pass on what you've received, keep the ripples spreading." Jerome nodded, unable to speak. Claire put a hand on his shoulder. "You're going to be okay," she said. "I promise you're going to be more than okay." That night Claire took the bus home. She could afford to drive now, could afford a car and a comfortable apartment and all the things she had once dreamed about. But she still took the bus sometimes, especially on nights like this. The 63 line, the same route she had ridden all those years ago when she had met an old man at a bus stop and helped him find his way home. The bus stopped at Ashland Avenue. Claire looked out the window at the shelter where she had once worked overnight shifts, where she had been so tired she could barely see straight. A young woman was standing near the entrance, talking to an elderly man who seemed confused, disoriented. She was helping him fill out intake paperwork, explaining something patiently, not rushing, even though it was late and cold, and she probably had somewhere else to be. Claire watched her for a long moment, then she smiled and turned back to the window. The ripples kept spreading, one small act of kindness leading to another, and another, and another. A chain of help that stretched back through time and forward into the future, connecting strangers in ways they would never fully understand. That was Harold Whitman's legacy, that was Denise Robinson's legacy, that was Edward's legacy, and now it was hers. The bus moved on through the Chicago night, carrying its passengers toward wherever they were going, each of them carrying their own weights and their own hopes and their own capacity for kindness. Claire watched the city scroll past the window and thought about her mother, about the years of sacrifice that had ended too soon, about the words Denise Robinson had repeated so many times. Kindness is the only thing poor people can afford to give away, so give it freely. She had given it freely, and it had come back to her 1,000-fold. Not because she had expected it, not because she had asked for it, but because that was how the ripples worked. You throw a stone in the water, and you never know where the waves will end up. You just have to trust that they will reach someone who needs them. Claire's phone buzzed, a text from Jerome, the young man from earlier that day. I just found out the scholarship covers my grandmother's home care costs too. The whole thing. I don't know how to thank you. Claire typed back, don't thank me. Thank the next person you help. Then she put her phone away and watched the city lights flicker past. Somewhere out there, in 1,000 different places, the ripples were still spreading, and they would keep spreading long after she was gone. That was the only immortality any of us ever got, and it was enough. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Claire was at her desk in the community center, reviewing applications for the next round of emergency assistance grants, when her assistant appeared in the doorway. There's someone here to see you. She says her name is Patricia Okonkwo. Claire looked up. She had not scheduled any meetings for today. Send her in. The woman who walked through the door was not anyone Claire recognized. Middle-aged, maybe early 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes and a folder clutched tightly in her hands. Miss Robinson, I'm sorry to bother you without an appointment, but I had to meet you. That's all right. What can I do for you? The woman sat down in the chair across from Claire's desk. Her hands were trembling slightly. My name is Patricia Okonkwo. I'm here because of my mother. Your mother? Her name was Grace Okonkwo. She was one of the first recipients of the Harold Whitman Trucking Family Emergency Fund. In 1983, Claire felt something shift in her chest. She remembered that name from Edward's files, one of the earliest recipients of his father's original fund, who had used the emergency assistance to keep her family afloat after her husband was injured on the job. Grace Okonkwo was your mother. Yes, she passed away last spring. But before she died, she told me about the fund, about how it saved our family, about how she became a community health worker because of the opportunity it gave her. Patricia opened her folder and pulled out a photograph. This is her. Back in 1983, she kept this photo her whole life. It shows her with the check she received from the fund, standing in front of our apartment in Midland. Claire looked at the photograph. A young woman, maybe 25 or 26, holding a piece of paper and smiling at the camera with an expression of pure relief. She talked about Mr. Whitman's father all the time, Patricia continued. How he was a good man, how he had helped trucking families even when he had nothing to give. She said the fund was more than just money. It was proof that someone out there cared about people like us. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. She worked at community health clinics in Texas for over 35 years. She helped migrant workers, uninsured families, anyone who needed care and couldn't afford it. She used to say that every patient she helped was a thank you note to Harold Whitman. Patricia's voice cracked. When she died, we found her journal. She'd kept it her whole life, and in it she wrote about the fund, about Mr. Whitman, about everything she wanted to do with her life. And at the end, on the last page, she wrote something that I wanted you to see. She handed Claire a worn notebook, open to the final entry. Claire read the faded handwriting. I'm dying, I know that now. The emphysema is winning, but I'm not afraid. I'm grateful. Grateful for 35 years of helping people. Grateful for the chance I was given. Grateful for Harold Whitman, who believed that kindness mattered. I don't know if anyone will remember me after I'm gone, but I hope the people I helped will help others, and those people will help others, and the ripples will spread and spread until they reach places I never could have imagined. That's how the world gets better, not through big gestures or grand plans, but through small acts of kindness repeated over and over, until they add up to something beautiful. I was a poor woman from West Texas whose husband couldn't work anymore, and because a truck driver believed in helping his own, I got to spend my life healing people. That's the best story I know. Claire looked up, tears streaming down her face. Why are you showing me this? Because my daughter is applying for the Denise Robinson Service Worker Scholarship. She's studying to be a community health worker just like my mother was, and I wanted you to know the chain you're continuing. Claire looked at this woman, Patricia Okonkwo, daughter of someone Harold Whitman's fund had helped 4 decades ago, now watching her own daughter prepare to continue that legacy. The ripples, still spreading. 42 years later. Tell me about your daughter, Claire said. Tell me why she wants to work in community health, and Patricia told her. About Amara growing up watching her grandmother care for people who had nowhere else to turn. About working nights at a pharmacy while going to school. About the exhaustion and the doubt and the hope that never quite went away. About the small moments of kindness that had kept her going when everything else felt impossible. When she finished, Claire reached across the desk and took her hand. Amara is going to make a wonderful health worker, she said, and she's going to help people the way your mother did. Does that mean she'll get the scholarship? It means she's exactly the kind of person we created this program for. Someone who understands that helping others isn't about what you get in return. It's about keeping the ripples spreading. That evening Claire walked through the rooftop greenhouse that had been built on top of the community center. The sun was setting, painting the Chicago sky in shades of orange and purple. Families were scattered throughout the greenhouse, tending their plots, harvesting vegetables, teaching their children how things grew. Claire stopped at a bench near the center of the space. There was a small plaque on it, weathered by years of sun and moisture. In memory of Harold Whitman and Denise Robinson, who taught us that kindness is the only thing worth giving away. She sat down and watched the families moving through the greenhouse, a grandfather helping his grandson plant herbs, a mother showing her daughter how to check if tomatoes were ripe, a group of teenagers from the job training program learning urban farming skills that would help them find work, all of them connected by invisible threads to a truck driver who died behind the wheel in 1982. And a hospital custodian who died on a hospital floor in 2022, and a billionaire who finally learned what mattered in the last years of his life. Claire's phone buzzed, a text from Jerome, the young man who had received the scholarship 8 months ago. Just got my acceptance letter, bachelor's program in healthcare administration. I'm going to do what you did, I'm going to help people. Claire smiled and typed back, I know you will. And when you're ready, you're going to help someone else do the same thing. She put her phone away and watched the sun set over the greenhouse. Somewhere in Seattle, Rebecca was teaching high school chemistry, the career her father had once called a waste of potential. She had forgiven Edward, not all at once, but slowly in increments, the way real healing happened. Somewhere in Texas, Amara Okonkwo was studying for her community health certification, carrying her grandmother's journal in her bag like a talisman. Somewhere in this neighborhood, families were living in affordable housing units that had been built after Edward stopped the displacement project and redirected his company's resources. And somewhere in a hospital across town, a custodian was cleaning floors and checking on patients who seemed lonely, just like Denise Robinson had done for 22 years. The ripples kept spreading. They would keep spreading long after Claire was gone. That was the beautiful thing about kindness. It did not need you to keep going. It had a life of its own. Claire stood up from the bench and walked toward the stairs. There was work to do. There was always work to do. Scholarships to review, programs to oversee, people to help. But that was okay. That was exactly where she was meant to be. 10 years later, Claire stood at a bus stop on Ashland Avenue. It was late, almost 10:30 at night. The same time she had been standing here all those years ago, when she had met an old man who was lost and helped him find his way home. The neighborhood had changed. The abandoned lots were now community gardens.
The shuttered storefronts were now small businesses. The corner where drunk men used to gather was now a small plaza with benches and a mural depicting the neighborhood's history. But the bus stop was the same. The same cracked concrete, the same faded route map, the same plastic bench where she had sat on cold nights when her feet were too tired to hold her up. Claire had come here on purpose tonight, not to catch a bus, but to remember who she had been, to remember who had helped her, to remember the chain of kindness that stretched back generations and forward into the future. A young woman was standing at the stop, maybe 19 years old, with tired eyes and a jacket too thin for the December wind. She was looking at her phone, frowning at the transit app like it was written in a foreign language. Claire smiled. "Need help?" she asked. The young woman looked up. "I'm trying to get to Lincoln Park, but I can't figure out which bus goes there from here." "That's the 74. But it doesn't stop at this location. You'll need to transfer at Fullerton." "I don't have a transit card, just this phone and the app keeps crashing." Claire reached into her pocket and pulled out her card. "Here," she said. "I'll tap you on. The 63 will take you to the transfer point." "I couldn't. It's fine, really, just pay it forward someday." The young woman studied Claire's face, the same way Claire had once studied the face of a lost old man in an expensive coat. "Thank you," she said, finally. "That's really kind. It's nothing. Just something someone did for me once a long time ago." The bus pulled up, groaning to a stop with a familiar hiss. Claire tapped her card twice, once for herself, once for the young woman, and watched the balance drop. The young woman boarded the bus, turned back to wave and disappeared inside. Claire stood on the sidewalk and watched the bus pull away, the ripples still spreading. 25 years after a social work student gave her bus fare to a stranger. 43 years after a truck driver stopped to help a stranded motorist on a dark highway. 60 years after a man named Harold Whitman decided that helping people mattered more than anything else in the world. Claire smiled and turned toward home. The work was never finished. The ripples never stopped spreading. And that was exactly how it should be, because that was what her mother had taught her. What Edward had remembered, what Harold Whitman had known all along. Kindness was not about what you got in return. It was about what you gave away. And the more you gave, the more there was. Claire walked through the neighborhood she had helped rebuild, past the community center that bore her mother's name alongside Harold Whitman's, past the greenhouse where families grew food for their neighbors, past all the small miracles that had sprouted from one moment of kindness at a cold Chicago bus stop. She did not know where the ripples would end up. Nobody ever did, but she knew they would keep spreading, long after she was gone, touching lives she would never see, in places she would never go. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.